All right, I will be doing my presentation on the article called He Blew the Whistle. This article is about Mr. Alderson. He was a hospital accountant, and at one point, the hospital that he was working for came under new management, and Corm was the company who was the new management of the hospital. He found out that they were creating two different copies of the cost report, one that was extremely aggressive, and that's the one that they would submit to the government. And then they had a more conservative one that they would keep for themselves to use for their own record keeping and such. This was considered Medicare fraud. So the first item that's talked about in the textbook by IMA is that an individual, when they are whistleblowing, they should first go through the organization's policies and procedures for potential fraud or things that they think are going wrong in the company. So this was the first step, but in Mr. Alderson's case, he didn't really have the opportunity to do that because a few days after he refused to create multiple copies of the cost report, he was fired from the company. It also, in the article, it made it sound like he wasn't aware of any policies that the company had at the time. The next step to be taken is to talk to an immediate supervisor. Once again, he had been fired, so he didn't really have the opportunity to talk to a supervisor. Another issue with this recommendation is that upper management is the one who was creating the fraudulent statements. Like, his supervisor was the one that he had the issue with and who he suspected for fraud. So he couldn't go to that supervisor. The supervisor already observed his unwillingness to follow the orders, and this was what Mr. Alderson thought the reason that he was fired. The next step is clarifying relevant ethical issues. I believe that Mr. Alderson did a really good job doing this. He went first to a former hospital administrator to see if this administrator had ever seen anything like this, if he had ever created two cost reports, and if he thought this was suspicious as well. When the former administrator agreed with Mr. Alderson, he also informed Mr. Alderson that there was a federal whistleblower law and kind of explained to him the steps that he could take to further this claim of fraud. He did a lot of research. He spent years and years, the entire time that the case was going on. He spent all of that time doing research and doing everything he possibly could to find out more about the situation and to fight it, to get justice, essentially. The next step and the last step is to consult your attorney. He did this. The very first thing that he did after finding out about the whistleblower law is go straight to the Attorney General of the United States to show them the case and ask if the government would get on board with him. And as this process was going on, he did find his own lawyer because he felt like the government lawyers were taking too long in the process. He felt he needed to kind of hurry them along because it had been drug on for about five or 6 years. So he found a lawyer that kind of specialized in these situations, in this Medicare fraud, and also this whistleblowing. So those were the steps he took, and I believe that he did a very good job at following these steps that were talked about in the textbook to the best of his abilities.